Today's daf we're going to be learning is Kiddushin daf Samach Gimel. Today's daf, first of all, Chodesh Tov and Shavua Tov to everybody. In a very strong way, I mean that really. So it should be a Shavua Tov. Today's daf is sponsored by Jody, Rachi, Unki, Mark, and the whole crew in honor of Ariel and her Chatan, Chayal, Nitai on their wedding day, and to Ariel's parents, Eric and Galip, and their entire family. We are filled with joy that the long-awaited day is finally here. Although we are heartbroken that this war has prevented us from standing physically by your side today, we are standing with you, wishing you a wedding day filled with simcha and the bracha that you build a bayit ne'eman b'Yisrael, a land where there is only peace and contentment. It is our greatest hope that by your wedding day there will be peace and we will somehow be able to join you. Either way, please know that you are deeply loved and we are always here for you. Today's daf is sponsored by the Hadran women of Long Island in honor of the birth of a granddaughter in Jerusalem to their friend and co-learner and hostess extraordinaire Malki Klein Spitz. As Leo and Sam, we welcome the new addition. We daven that the Jewish nation celebrate many smachot in peace. Okay, with that, we will get started for today. We ended the last daf with this idea that Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov holds that Adam makneh davar shelo ba'al olam. A person can have a sort of ownership over something that is not yet in existence. So now Abai is going to do what he likes to do in general, which is collect other people who say the same thing in other contexts and say, hey, look, we have other people that say the same thing, and let's pull out those sugyot and show you. So 3 lines from the bottom of Samach Bet Amud Amar Abai, Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov v'Rebbe v'Rabbi Meir, kulu svira lehu adam makneh davar shelo ba'al olam. All 3 of them hold that a person can acquire something that's not yet in existence. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov Hadamaran. That one we already saw. That was about the truma, that you can take truma and saying when this gets detached from the ground, right? When it reaches a third, when it's not even a third grown yet, and yet you can say when this happens, it will be truma, right? So that there's this idea that you can do something now and something that's not yet in existence. Rebbe, where does he say this? Detanya lo tazgir eved al adonav. This is a pasuk that's a little hard to understand what it means. The pshat is not this way, but Rebbe takes the pasuk out of its context and says what it means is, what the literal translation is, do not make a servant or a slave. You can't continue to enslave a slave to its master, something like that, which is obviously hard to understand. Of course, a slave is enslaved to the master. So what does it mean? So Rebbe Omer, and again, this isn't the typical translation of this pasuk, but Rebbe Omer belokech eved almanat l'shachar roa katuv medaber. If you buy a slave with the intent to free him, okay, which we're going to see in a minute what exactly you say, but if you say it in that way, I'm acquiring you with the intent to free you. We're talking about a Canaanite slave, that when you free the Canaanite slave, he becomes Jewish. When you do that, he's actually freed. And then lo tazgir eved al adonav, you can't make this slave work anymore. So what does this mean? Hey chidami, what exactly is the case? And why is this Adam makneh davar shelo ba'al olam? A person can acquire something that's not yet in existence. Amar Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak kegon dekatav le l'chisha ekachacha harei atzmacha knuya l'chamei achshav. You wrote to this slave and you wrote the following. He was a slave. You went to purchase him. And you said, when I purchase you, you are going to be freed. Now, you can't free a slave unless the slave is owned by you. And what you're saying is, you'll be freed when I own you down the road. So theoretically, this is davar shelo ba'al olam because he's not your slave right now. How can you free him? But comes Rebbe and says, no, you can't, because this, you have the rights to acquire. In this case, the acquiring is the freeing of the slave. You can view him as if he's yours to free him, even though at this moment he's not yours. And then lo tazgir eved al adonav kicks in, meaning you cannot enslave this person because they're free and they're Jewish now. Rabbi Meir, where does he say it? Detanya haomer lisha, you might remember we saw this already. Hareat mikudeshet li la'achal she'etgayer. You will be betrothed to me after I convert. La'achar she'titgari. So he's not Jewish, and he says after I convert, you'll be betrothed to me. Or he says after you convert, she's not Jewish. After you convert, you'll be betrothed to me. La'achar she'eshtachrer. After I become Jewish because I'm a Canaanite slave, and as soon as I get freed, you'll be my wife. Or lachar she'tishtachri, or after you get freed, you'll be my wife. Lachar she'amut ba'alech. Right now, you're a married woman. But after her husband dies, I'll be betrothed to you. Right? It's a little bit weird to do that. Talk about that in a bit. Lachar she'tamud achotech. If you remember, with the sister, if someone's married to a woman, and then he wants to marry her sister, even if he divorces her, he's not allowed to marry the sister. That's a raya. But if the wife dies, whether they were divorced or not divorced, it doesn't really matter. Once she's no longer alive, then he's allowed to marry the sister. Okay, that's different from the brothers. Brothers can never marry their brother's wife whether the brother's alive or not alive anymore, right? That's the whole yibum, that only if there's yibum, but not if there's no yibum obligation. But if you say, I will be betrothed to you after your sister dies because I was once married to your sister, or I'm now married to your sister, or a woman who's supposed to do yibum and her husband died. Unfortunately, we now have a lot of situations like this where a lot of young soldiers have died and left wives without children. There's going to be a whole need for chalitza right now for a lot of women, unfortunately. So he goes over to a woman like that and says, listen, after you get chalitza done, you'll be betrothed to me. So again, all these are where there's a betrothal ceremony going on, dependent on some future thing happening. That's davar shelo ba'lo olam. So the Tanakama says Eina Mekudeshet, but Rabbi Meir says Mekudeshet. So here you have Rabbi Meir who says she's betrothed. Now you're going to see a few more opinions, which are some going to match up, some are going to be a little different. Rabbi Yochanan Salar Amar Eina Mekudeshet. He holds just like Tanakama that she's not betrothed in these cases. Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi Omer Mekudeshet. Okay, Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi says she is betrothed. However, he says something a little strange a second later. Umatam amru eina mekudeshet, but why do they say she's not mekudeshet? So you have to read between the lines here and understand what he means. So the commentaries help out with this. What he means is, we had a whole list of cases. After I convert, after you convert, after I become free, after you become free, after, right? All these. And then there were two cases after your husband dies or after your sister dies. Okay? So why in those two cases we're going to make an exception? All the other cases work. He says, you can be betrothed to me after I convert, according to Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, no problem, because Adam makneh davar shelo ba'lo olam. But in the case of after your husband dies or after your sister dies, which is, like we said, a little bit strange to be saying while she's married, or even if she's not married, if the sister, the first wife was divorced, still to say, well, after she dies, I'll be betrothed to your sister, it's a little bit weird. So in those cases, the rabbi said, that's not going to work because mishum eva. They didn't want to create a situation. Okay, let's talk about each situation. If, let's say I'm married to someone and they say, I'm going to be betrothed to your sister when you die, right? That's going to obviously create a lot of tension between me and my sister, right? That's going to create a bad, luckily I have no sister, so I don't really have to think about that situation, but it would be a very bad situation. If my husband says to me, no, someone else says to me, I'm going to be betrothed to you after your husband dies, right? That's going to create a lot of tension because, first of all, you have to remember, in Kiddushin, I accept. So that means I had to accept that. Now, if I accept that, my husband's going to be pretty annoyed at me. Like, what are you planning my death? And it's going to create tension between me and my husband. So because those are, and again, it's how we saw them in the beginning. It's kind of a ridiculous situation, but not only is it ridiculous, the rabbi say it's going to cause a lot of tension, either between two sisters or between a husband and wife. And therefore, those don't work at all. It's a meaningless statement. Now we have a question, which is Rabbi Yehuda Nasi theoretically agree with Rabbi Meir, right? So why isn't he on the list of Abaye? V'nichshav nami Rabbi Yehuda Nasi. Rabbi Yehuda Nasi should have been listed there. Now let's go back and let's see who he listed. Rabbi Lezer ben Yaakov, Rebbe, and Rabbi Meir. To which the Gemara answers, of course Rabbi Yehuda Nasi was in that list. Don't you remember? Hainu Rebbe, Hainu Rabbi Yehuda Nasi. Rebbe is Rabbi Yehuda Nasi. We always call him Rebbe, but he's Rabbi Yehuda Nasi. So he is in the list. And we happen to just quote a different source that Rebbe said it. But Rabbi Yehuda Nasi says the same thing here. They're the same person. So that's why he's not on the list, because he is on the list. It's kind of a funny answer. Like they didn't know that Rebbe was Rabbi Yehuda Nasi. Okay, next. Now they're going to say, before we get to the next Mishna, last thing for this sugya is Nichshav Nami Rabbi Akiva. Why don't we have Rabbi Akiva to list? Why did Abaye ignore him? Let's see where Rabbi Akiva says it. Ditanya. Konam Shani of Selaficha. You might remember this case. A woman says, a woman in general, she works, whatever she makes goes to her husband. Okay? Her husband, in turn, gives her mizonot. But you might also remember that we talked about in Ketubot about ha'adafa, which is if she makes a super high salary, okay, beyond the normal, okay, what the normal is, this whole thing about that, but let's just assume whatever the normal is, she makes more, she gets to keep that for herself. So now we have this Mishna, Braita, where she says, anything, konam is a language of a vow, anything I make, which is by law supposed to go to him, konam, it will be forbidden, lepicha. You can't eat it, it doesn't even mean eat it, it means you can't benefit from anything I make. Ein tzarich laper. So according to Tanakama, you don't even need to do hafara, that's what the husband has a right to nullify her vows. He doesn't even need to, because that vow is against what the Torah says. The Torah says, right? Again, it's not written explicitly in the Torah, but it's an understanding that she gives him all her, right? All of her stuff goes to him. Again, he provides her with other things because of that. So you don't even have to nullify that vow. Here comes Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva, now, while, let's say $100 an hour is the minimum, okay? I'm just throwing a number out. So if she makes 125, well, on the 100, she can't vow not to give to him because that's not going to happen. It's not, he has rights to the 100, they're his. So she can't take a vow and say, I forbid you to have something that's rightfully yours. But on the 25, she can. So the neder, he can actually nullify the vow because it might be that in the future she'll make more, and the neder applies to that potential possibility. You already know where this is going. This is davar shelo ba'lo olam adayin. She doesn't have that extra salary yet, but maybe she'll make that salary, and therefore he can nullify the vow in case she ends up making more money. So that seems to be adam makneh davar shelo ba'lam. The neder can apply to something that's not yet in existence. To which they say, no, you misunderstood this whole mission. This isn't davar she'eino ba'lo olam. Why? Ha'it marla, wasn't it said about this braita? Sorry, not Mishna braita. Amar Rav Huna b'reit Rav Yoshua be'omeret yikadshu yaday lo sehem v'yadayim einu ba'olam. They have to take this whole braita out of the context of davar shelo ba'lo olam. They say we're not talking about something that's not yet in existence. We're talking about her saying, Yikadshu yadai, anything my hands create will be forbidden to my husband. So once she puts it in the terms of my hands, her hands are in existence. So even though the work her hands have done are not in existence, her hands are in existence, and the vow is, the language of it is again, they say whether she said this or whether she didn't say it, this is what she meant, that anything my hands create. And even though the focus is really on the hands and not on anything, right? Or what will be created. It's more my hands, which are in existence. And then it takes it out of the whole realm of davar shelo ba'lo olam. And therefore, Rabbi Akiva actually, he says, if you say, yikadshu yaday lo sehen, my hands, well, maybe she'll make extra. And on that extra, the neder will be applicable. Whereas Tanakama view it as, what do you mean? Her maseh yadayim go to the husband, and therefore, right, they're not worried about ha'adafa. And therefore, it has nothing to do with davar shelo ba'lo olam. So what we did very simply, we'll summarize this part. We won't go back to it at the end because it's very simple. Abai wanted to say there's a bunch of people that hold adam makneh davar shelo ba'lo olam. We showed each of the sources. We questioned, why isn't Rabbi Yehuda C on the list, to which we said he is on the list because he's Rabbi. And then we said, why is Rabbi Akiva on the list? And then we said, it's not a case of davar shelo ba'lo olam. New Mishna, different topic. Although we're still in our main topic of conditions. You're betrothed to me on the promise that I will go to the authorities and help you out with some issue you have. Okay, I'll help take care of some technical problem you have that you need, bureaucratic problem, or I don't know what. I'll take care of it for you. Or I'll do a day's work for you in, I'll paint your house or whatever it might be. This seems very straightforward and simple, just like all the others. Okay, he made it tonight. If he fulfills the tonight, great. If not, she's not betrothed. Very simple. But Amar Rish Lakish, so Rish Lakish points out that you should understand this is a condition. What does a condition mean? A condition means you didn't betroth her with, for example, the money that you're going to not charge her for because you said you'll paint her house, let's say. No, you have to give her a coin, let's say, or a ring. Say, you're betrothed to me with this ring. And if he did this and didn't give her a ring or something of monetary value of a pruta, and said, on the condition that I will work for you, even though it means I'll work for you for free, and that's worth something, you still need to betroth her with a shefa pruta. To which the Gemara is going to say, I don't understand why. Ubisachar lo, what does it not work? By giving her, right, by not charging her for the work. And isn't that worth a pruta? So wouldn't she be able to be betrothed just with that alone? To which they're going to bring two proofs that you could do this. One, V'hatanya, it says in a braita. Okay, now you have to understand that the context is, he says, you are betrothed to me. You will be betrothed to me with the money that I'm not going to make you pay me for the fact that I rode you on a donkey, or I rode you on in a carriage, or basfina, or in a boat. Okay? If he says, you're betrothed to me last week, I did something for you. Now I'm going to betroth you with that, with the money, and I'm not going to charge you for it. And I'm a kudesh. Why not? We've learned this before. Why not? Because it's a loan. Remember? Basically, what happens is she owed him the money a week ago. She hasn't paid it yet. That means she owes him money. It's like a loan. And he's now saying, I'm canceling the loan. Now, we already learned you can't betroth a woman by canceling a loan that she has with you. But if he says, well, I'm going to, okay? I am being betrothed to you with the fact that tomorrow I'll take you on a donkey ride, okay? Or oshivech b'karon, or I'll take you on a carriage ride, or in a boat. Mikudeshet, she's betrothed. Okay, that works. So now what do you see? Okay, the first part wasn't important, but if it's something that hasn't yet happened, then it works. So why wouldn't you say in our Mishnah that you don't need a shavapruta? Why did Rish Lakish say you need a shavapruta? You need to give her a ring also, because he said, right, on condition that I work for you for a day. So if he's going to work for her for a day, that's worth money. Why do you need something additional? Now, maybe you want to say the Braita we just quoted was also he gave her a ring or something worth money. Can't be, because habis sachar kamar. Look at the language. It says he will betroth her with the money with the money she owes him for the fact that he's going to take her on a donkey ride. So that's number one. And another Braita. Shevi mi b'tzavta ve'ekadesh lach. Sit together with me and I'll be betrothed to you on account of the woman says to the man, I'll be betrothed to you with the fact that you've sat with me. That to me is worth something. He's an entertainer. And she says, do a stand-up show for me, which is worth money, obviously. And I'll be betrothed to you with that. Rikod lefanai, dance before me. Aseh kedimus hazeh. This is a little bit weird. It doesn't really, one of these is not like the other. It sounds like make a row of bricks for me or something. So the Rabbeinu Hananel says, it should read as Rikod lefanai badimus hazeh. Dimus is like a row of bricks or stones. And what she means is dance before me on this stage that's made of stones or something like that. It makes a lot more sense to say it that way. Either way, whether it's another thing or it's connected to the previous, you get the idea here. So basically, he's going to do something that's worth money. And shamin, we evaluate im yesh bo shavapruta mekudeshet v'im lavi no mekudeshet. Is he a good stand-up? Is he a good, whatever you call it, stand-up comedian, or is he bad? Is it worth nothing? Would nobody pay for it? Or would people pay for this kind of entertainment? So, or is his dancing worth money or not? So if this is worth something, a pruta, then she's betrothed. And if not, not. And if you want to say, maybe he gave her something else worth a pruta, that's obviously not the case here. Because hashaminoto kamar, it says, we evaluate, meaning we need to figure out, is this a shavapruta or not? So in the end, what do we have? We have two cases that show that he could betroth her with the fact that he will do some sort of work for her, some sort of action that is worth money. So why in our Mishnah did Rish Lakish have to say that he has to give her a shavapruta if he said on the condition that I'm going to work for you for a day? The work should be the value, which should be the Kiddushin. So to Rish Lakish, this really is a question, because remember, Rish Lakish was the one who said it must be. Don't understand our Mishnah that there wasn't a pruta here. He has to give her something in addition to the condition he made. So Amar Lecha Rish Lakish. Rish Lakish says no. Why? What's the difference between the Tana in the Braitot and the Tana our Tana? We're going to call Tana Didan is our Tana, meaning our Mishnah. Tana Bara is outside, meaning the outside Tanaim, meaning the ones who are in the Braitot are different than the one in our Mishnah. They held different approaches to something that we've seen before. Hi Tana Bara, the Tana of the Braita Saval, Eina l'schirut ela levasof. What does it mean, Eina l'schirut ela levasof? That means that when you do work for someone, the obligation to pay kicks in only at the end. So that means when he says you'll be betrothed to me with the fact that I'm going to do work for you, well, the betrothal is going to kick in when? At the end. And what also kicks in at the end? The obligation to pay. Because the obligation to pay kicks in at the same time. It's not a loan. It's not viewed as a loan. And therefore, she'll be betrothed. That's the two bright. But Tana Didan Savar, Yeshna l'schirut mitchila v'ad sof. Our Tana holds that schirut, when you do a job for someone, every minute is worth, let's say, it's a job that's 100 hours, and it's $100 for the job. every minute is worth $1. So every minute you do, she's obligated $1. Then she's obligated $2. She's obligated $3, $4, $5, $6. By the time you get to the end, she's owed all this money all along. So 99 of the dollars of the 100 are basically a loan because the obligation for her to pay kicks in right away. So basically, when he betroths her, and the betrothal is going to happen when he finishes the work, so basically it was all a loan all along. He's betrothing her with a loan, which doesn't work. That's why Rish Lakish says it can't be through the work. It has to be that he gives her a sheva pruta at the moment he does the betrothal, so that they're betrothed with that. And now it's just a condition that she has to fulfill, that he has to fulfill, okay, in order, right? Like we saw before. Right now, the 200 zuz is not the Kiddushin money. It's just saying, I will pay you 200 zuz down the road. So now they ask a question. There's two ways to have understood our Mishnah according to Rish Lakish. One is to say like he did, which is say that the Tana of our Mishnah holds, and that's why it can't be that the work is going to be it. So it's got to be a pruta. Or you could have said, the Mishnah is where there's no pruta. Remember, Rish Lakish was the one who opened his mouth and said it must be he gives her a pruta. You could have just said he didn't give her a pruta, and it's just like the other cases that we saw in the betroths. And that the Tana of our Mishnah holds that schirut only kicks in, the obligation to pay only kicks in at the end, and this would work without even a pruta. So the question the Gemara asks now is, why did Rish Lakish choose option A and not option B, or whichever one you want to call it, A and B? Why did he have to say our Mishnah, our Tana holds that schirut starts right from the beginning, and it would only work if he actually gave her a pruta? You could have said, right, the Gemara doesn't spell this out, but you could have said, there was no pruta, you don't have to give her a pruta, and schirut only works at the end, and therefore this would work. So, Ela Rava matnitin kashite. Amar Rava. Rava says to about Rish Lakish, matnitin kashite. He was struggling with understanding the Mishnah. Why? My area detane alminat nitne bisachal. Notice the language in our Mishnah is very different than the Braita we saw. The Braita said, I'm going to betroth you with the money that it will cost for me to do this work for you, right? And I'll give you work for free. But this Mishnah said, I'm betrothing you on the condition. Condition is not a words of betrothal. I'm betrothing you with this on condition that. Understand the word on condition was strange. Why did you say if the whole betrothal is going to be on the money that she doesn't have to pay him for the work he's going to do? It should have said, bisachal of this, right? So because it said almanat and not bisachal, elish mamina call almanat hechadiyav lahu. Rish Lakish understands that whenever it says there's a condition, it means that he betrothed her with something of money value, or monetary value of a pruta, but said under the condition that I do something else, which could have been of monetary value also, but that's irrelevant to us. It's just he has to fulfill the condition. But this is laws of condition, it has nothing to do with that. Okay, so again, to review, and then again, we won't go back at the end of the daf. So now he says, on the condition that I do some work for you, or I'll talk to the authorities for you. Only if he does that, and according to Rish Lakish, and he gives her a pruta at the beginning. Otherwise, it wouldn't work. Again, it would if he used a different language, or it would if you held that schirut works, the obligation only kicks in at the end. But Rish Lakish says our Mishnah must be that he gave her a pruta, and then you would have to say that it's because he holds that schirut only starts already at the beginning, and then this would be a loan. So the only way it would work is if he actually gives her a pruta. New Mishnah. The man says, you're betrothed to me as long as my father agrees. As far as my father wants it, okay, which means my father agrees. We're going to have three scenarios now. Okay, the way we're going to read the Mishnah right now is it seems to be that there's a colon after the words with three scenarios. Okay, if he says you're betrothed to me on the condition that my father agrees, option number one is either the father says yes I agree, or no I don't agree, and then depending on what he says, they'll either be betrothed or not. The father says yes, then they're betrothed. The father says no, they're not betrothed. Or it sounds like if the father says yes, they're betrothed. If he doesn't say anything, it sounds like they're not betrothed. This is going to create a little bit of a problem because the next scenario is Meit Ha'av. If the father dies without having said anything, Harezo Mekudeshet, she's betrothed. Now, it would seem from the last one that she wouldn't be betrothed because only if he says yes would it work. If he was silent, it sounds like it wouldn't work. But now it seems like, well, if he didn't say anything, meaning he didn't protest, then she would be betrothed. Okay, so if he dies 5 minutes later and there was no disapproval, we can assume he approved and she's betrothed, or if he died 5 weeks later, either way. Meit haben, now this goes back to the whole yibum problem, chalitza problem, we were just mentioning is unfortunately very relevant right now. If the son dies, now what's the issue? We'd rather avoid chalitza. So if the son dies and the father hasn't said anything yet, milamdim ha'av lomar she'eino rotzeh. We tell the father, listen, say right now that you never agreed in the first place or that you don't agree, in which case the betrothal will never have gone into effect because now you've said, I don't agree. So we tell the father, listen, say you don't agree to avoid the wife from having, the widow from having to do chalitza. So now the Gemara is going to say there's a bit of a contradiction here. Things don't really jive as simply as it sounds. My almanat yirtzeh ha'aba. What does it mean the father agrees? What does agreement mean? Does agreement mean saying yes or not necessarily, or just silence? So from the beginning, right, ilema ad amar aba'in, if you're going to say until the father actually says yes, that's the only way it's going to work. Well, that works great for the beginning, right? If he said yes, right, ratzah ha'av means he said yes, as opposed to if he didn't say yes. But ema mitziata, but then the second case doesn't work because what did it say in the second case? Meita'av ha'rizim kudeshet. If he dies without having said anything, we assume he agreed. Now, even though he didn't say yes. So something doesn't work. If you say shiur abba means the father says yes, he didn't say yes in case number 2, and yet we assume he agreed. So that doesn't seem to work. Halo amar'in, he didn't say yes. Ella, turning out amabet. So if you go the opposite way and say amanat shishtok abba, the father is just quiet, and by silence we assume he agrees, well then ema seifa, the third case doesn't work. Because met haben milamdim et ha'av lomar she'eino rotzeh. If the son dies, we tell the father to say he doesn't want it. Now, if the father was silent and we translate silence as agreement, then the father already agreed to the betrothal, and the betrothal is in effect. And he can't now say, oh, I don't agree, and retroactively nullify the betrothal, right? Amai, v'hashatik. He was already silent, which means he agreed. So it's very hard, the way we wanted to explain it, which is, amanat shirtzeh abba, that all these are the same scenario, doesn't really make sense. So Ella, amarla amanat shelo yimche'ab. So now they try a different option. Maybe it doesn't mean amanat yirtzeh abba, that he wants to agree, that he has to agree and say yes. But it must mean amanat shelo yimche'ab. Maybe, and it's not amanat shelo yishtok, but amanat that the father won't protest. So now let's try to figure it out though. But then Reisha b'chad tama, mitziata v'seifa b'chad tama. So now, how are we going to understand? This explains the second and the third case, because if you say the father won't protest, so now in the second case, and what we mean is won't protest forever. So even though, what was our problem? The second scenario works perfectly. The father died, he didn't protest, great. The betrothal is a betrothal. That means he agreed. But if you say in case number 3, the father didn't protest, well, he might not have protested before the son died, but he can always protest down the road. So now we tell him, oh, protest, and then he'll protest, and that will mean the Kiddushin was never Kiddushin. But the Reisha, where it says im ratzah reino ratzah, would have to be that he said yes, right? But you need a yes answer to make it clear, well, which one it was. So therefore, they're going to say Reisha b'chad tama, mitziata v'seifa b'chad tama. Instead of saying amanat yirtzeh abba, 1, 2, 3, it's amanat yirtzeh abba is the first case. And then he either needs to say yes, or he either says nothing, or he says no, but that would be the first case, where it says amanat yirtzeh abba. Case 2 and 3 is amanat shelo yimche'ab abba, forever, right? That my father will never protest this betrothal. And then you have the power to change it if the son dies to basically prevent the chalitza situation. So the Gemara is asking this as a question. You're saying Reisha b'chad tama, mitziata b'seifa b'chad tama. You're saying there's a different case for the first one and a different case for second and third cases? Doesn't make sense. It wasn't. They seem to be discussing all the same scenario. It was just a matter of what happened down the road. But the case really sounds like it was one and the same. And Rabbi Yana says, listen, I don't have a problem. The Mishna really doesn't make sense otherwise. We'd have to explain. Case number 1 is amanat yirtzeh abba. My father wants it. And then the father would say yes, and then it would be good. Not, it wouldn't be good. And then the next 2 cases are a case where he said, amanat shelo yimche'ab abba, forever. Okay? So now, I see you're asking a question. I didn't read it carefully, but I see there was a question in the chat. I want to make this clear. The case is the father of the groom. The groom is saying on the case that my father agrees to this, not the father of the bride. It's all about the agreement of his own father. Because remember, a father doesn't need to agree to the son's betrothal, but in this case, the son conditioned it upon his father agreeing. So now, Rabbi Yanai basically says the only way to understand the Mishnah, and I don't have a problem with this, is to explain. First case is one, second and third case is something else was said by the son. Amarish Lakish, Maminami de Rabbi Yanai, you can infer from Rabbi Yanai now, Dachkina no mukmina matnitim betrei tama, v'liba dechad tana, v'lo mukmina betrei tanai ubachad tama. It sounds like a little bit of a confusing line, but it's very simple. When we struggle with a Mishnah, if you have a choice, you have two choices. Either you could say these are different opinions, and that's why they don't match up, which we do sometimes, even though we don't like to do that, right? Sometimes we have no choice but to say, oh, this is Rabbi Yehuda and this is Rabbi Shimon, or something like that. In this case, what do? We instead of saying it's all the same case, but they're different Tanaitic opinions who disagree with each other, he would rather have chosen the path and comes and says, well, this will teach me in general that when we have this kind of situation, if we can explain there's different scenarios going on in each part of the Mishnah, but it all agrees with one Tanaitic opinion, better to do that than to say it's all one case, but different Tanaitic opinions. Rav Yosef Bar Ami Amar, here we're going to have a different resolution to this problem. So until now, we said the only resolution to the problem is first case where the father says yes, right? Where if the father wants yes, if not, not, is a case where he said, if my father wishes for this to be, right? And the father would have to say, yes, I do, to show his approval. The second two cases are Amanacha lo yimcha, that my father won't protest and for forever, really. So if at some point later, like after the son dies, the father can still come and protest and say, yeah, I know I was silent before, but that didn't mean anything. He gave me the opportunity to protest further down the road. So I'm protesting now, and then that would resolve it. Okay, and that explains the Mishnah. But Rav Yosef Bar Ami would rather come up with them all being the same case. And he comes up with a way. He says, L'olam chad tamahu. Now, what he has to do a little bit is take the words a little bit out of, their simple meaning. The Mishnah had said, Amanat yirtzeh abba. And then we have, scenario 1, 2, and 3 within that case. So what does he do? He changes those words a little bit to a case that would work for all three cases. What is that? Umay amanat yirtzeh abba. Amanat shelo yimcha abba mikam ba'ad 30 yom. He says that my father won't protest from now until 30 days. So now let's go through each of the scenarios. Either imratzah, the father doesn't protest for 30 days, then they're betrothed. Lo ratzah means he protested within the 30 days, and then they won't be betrothed. That's case number 1. Case number 2, the father dies without protesting. So within, it could be he died within 30 days. It could be he died on day 5. It could be he died on day, 100. It doesn't make a difference. I mean, I guess it would be within the 30 days because otherwise you wouldn't even need to tell us because he already passed the 30 days and didn't protest. But the point is, since he didn't protest, right, we don't know what he was thinking. It doesn't matter. He didn't protest. They're betrothed. Last case is the son dies within 30 days. And then the father basically has to say, we teach him to say, listen, protest right now so that the Kiddushin won't come into effect and she won't have to do chalitza. So Rabbi Yosef Bar Ami found a case that will work with all three, that you could say it's all really one and the same case. He just had to change the words a little bit in the Mishnah. It's not just shelo yirtzeh abba, but it's almanat shelo yimcha abba for a certain small, a certain time period. 30 days is just a random time period they gave it, but it could be right, any kind of time period, then it would actually be able to work with all the cases. New Mishnah. Very strange case. The father comes and says, listen, I did a betrothal with some guy. I don't remember who it is. Now, in comes the guy. I'm the one. Ne'eman, he's believed. Okay, we're going to have to get into why is he believed, and we're going to see a bit of machloket in the Gemara about this. To what extent does he believe? Number 1, why is he believed, and to what extent do we believe him? We'll talk about that soon. Ze'amal, but what if the father says, I betrothed her to someone, but I don't remember who? Come 2 guys. Ze'amar ani kiddashtia, v'ze'amar ani kiddashtia. This sounds like Shlomo HaMelech with the baby, right? They both come and say, I'm the one who you betrothed her to. Shnehem notnim get. Okay, they both have to give her a get. We'll see in a minute that the first opinion is going to say, what does it mean, ne'eman? Ne'eman means he's believed to give her a get, which means that, what's the problem? The problem is she's an eshet ishna. Well, if there's one guy and he says, I'm the one, then, and he's the only one who comes forward, we have him give her the get, and she now can marry anyone she wants. We assume for her purposes that freed her up, even though theoretically she could be betrothed to someone else, but the law is we allow it. If 2 people come and say, we're both the ones, then they both give her a get, and only after they both give her a get is she free to marry anyone she wants. But if they wanted, in this case, one could give her a get, and after the first one gives her the get, the other one could marry. Okay, which is going to lead Rav. Okay, we'll see this now in a minute. Rav Amarav. Okay, we'll get back to that case soon, why that works. Okay, but it seems like once one gives her the get, we can assume he was the only potential guy. In other words, either the other one was the one, but he already freed her, so the second guy could get married to her, or the second guy was the one, and then he could marry her. So either which way, it seems like he could marry her, although the Gemara is going to understand the case a little differently. Amarav. Ne'eman litain get ve'ein ne'eman lifnos. Rav says, to what extent do we believe, going back to the case where there's one guy comes forward and says, I'm the guy. We believe him to say he can give her a get and she is now free to marry anybody she wants. She's no longer considered an Eish, even though theoretically maybe she was betrothed to someone else. But he's not believed enough to allow him to marry her. He can't marry her and say, look, I did Kiddushin with her, now I'm going to marry her. So why is this? Ne'eman litain get, because in the end, giving her a get does not affect him at all. And there's this assumption that ein adam chotei v'lo lo. He's not going to sin to help some like he's not going to do something wrong when he has no benefit from it. Now, if he says, you were betrothed to me and here's your get and now you're free to marry anyone you want. If he was lying about this and is basically allowing her to marry anyone she wants when she's really an Eish, well, he has no motivation to do that. We don't assume people would do sin just to bring evil into the world. Like, oh, let's just mess up this woman's life. He wouldn't do that. So therefore we must believe him. But that's where it doesn't affect him. But you could be here, this guy say, I betrothed my daughter to someone, I don't know to who, and he really wants to marry her. So he says, oh, it was me, hoping that the father won't notice and, remember all of a sudden, no, it wasn't you. And basically he really wants to marry her. She's a beautiful woman, I don't know what, and he wants to be with her. So he'll say, oh, it was me. That he has benefit from being able to marry her. So for that, we don't believe him. Rav Asi Amar, Rav Asi says, what are you talking about? If we believe him to allow her to marry someone else, we also believe him to marry him. What's the big deal? Umode Rav Asi, but Rav Asi says, in that case, we'll believe him because we assume he's telling the truth. Now, why? Rav Asi assumes, okay, let's imagine the scenario. The father doesn't remember, but the father knows he betrothed her to someone. Now, when this guy shows up on the scene, okay, now let's say the guy who she married was the guy that the father betrothed him to was a small, puny, blonde hair, blue-eyed guy. And this guy is a tall, big, dark hair, dark eyes, totally different look. Okay. Now the father looks and says, that was not the guy. I don't remember who it was, but it was certainly not you. So he wouldn't have the chutzpah to go up when the father says, I know I betrothed her to someone, and say it was me when it was totally not him. Because who knows? He doesn't know what the other guy looked like. It might look totally different. It might remind the father, and the father's going to be, that wasn't you. So he wouldn't have the chutzpah to do it according to Rav Asi, and therefore he's believed even to marry her. But Moder Rav Asi b'omer nitkadashi ve'ini yodad l'mi nitkadashi. But Rav Asi brings up another case. What if the woman says I was betrothed and I don't remember who I was betrothed to? She'ein ne'eman lifnos. In that case, he's not believed. Now the Gemara is going to show later why not, because it could be. You have to imagine. I was trying to figure out what scenario this is and why this would only be with her and not with the father. But perhaps she's not so happy with the man who the father betrothed her to. So what does she do? She says, listen, I'm betrothed to someone, I don't remember who. And she works out with the guy she's in love with. It's almost like a Romeo-Juliet scenario. And she says, oh, I don't remember who. And he comes up innocently and says, oh, me, I'm the one. And she says, oh, yeah, you are the one. And then they go off and stay married when she's really betrothed to somebody else. So they're worried in this case. Rav Asi says, I'm worried. In this case, I agree that it wouldn't work. Okay. When the father does it, I'm not worried for that kind of thing. The father's not going to go lie about who she's betrothed to, even though theoretically you could say maybe he would. But in the end, the father agreed to the betrothal in the first place. So he's not going to start changing it. But the daughter, maybe because she wasn't the one who did the betrothal, again, this would assume maybe that the father did the betrothal. Maybe she really wants to be with someone else. And they're working what they call in the Gemara, the language, they call it a knunya. They're doing a conspiracy basically to work together to do this. Now the Gemara goes back to our Mishna and says, wait a minute, we're going to bring a question on Rav from the end of our Mishna. If Rav says he's not believed to marry her, Tanan, it says in our Mishna, Ratzu, echad noten get, echad kones, tiyuv to derava. But in the case where there's two, we do allow one of them to marry her. Now, the commentaries all question, why is this really a question to Rav? This is a different case. And as I explained it, it was very different. But they say in the end here that since he could be konesota, even though, right, there were two here. It doesn't really matter. He shouldn't be ne'eman at all to be able to marry her, according to Rav, because that's what Rav said. He's only believed to give her a get. He's not believed to betroth her, to marry her. So Amar l'cha Rav would say, we actually believe him more in the case where there's two. Because even though Rav thinks that maybe he would lie to the father-in-law and say it was me and not really worried that the father-in-law is going to remember. But when there's two guys there, you imagine like a lineup, right? When there's two guys, you can better identify someone because you see him compared to somebody else. And there, since there's another guy who's claiming the same thing, the father might remember that he's the guy and not me. And therefore, if he is going to actually say it's me and I want to marry her now based on the betrothal, we actually do believe him more. Tanya Kavatei Rav Asi. Now we bring a bright that supports Rav Asi. Kidashti et biti ve'eno yodea lemi kidashtia uba acher v'amar kidashtia af ne'eman lichnos. This is exactly Rav Asi. He says, right, here's the bright. The bright says, I betrothed my daughter. I don't remember to who. The guy comes and says it was to me. He can even marry her based on that. That was Rav Asi. Now the bright continues. Kenasa uba acher v'amar ani kidashtia. What if he marries her? And then someone else comes along a month later and says, hey, I was the one. No problem. We ignore that guy because the rabbis already said you can marry based on this. And once they allow it, we don't let anybody come and complain later. So, lo kolimenu lascha alav, meaning he can't forbid this woman to her husband now, the one she's married to. And this is also for Rav Asi. Remember, the Braita now is saying, a woman who said nitkadashti, but I don't know to who, and someone else came and said, this is me. And here they say it explicitly, she could be covering for him. Okay, and she could be, again, conspiracy. Now they ask a different question, which they're going to connect to this. This is now just talking about not a case like this, but in general, a father who says, I betrothed my daughter, let's say even to someone in particular, it doesn't matter whether he remembers or not. How believed is a father to say my daughter was betrothed to someone without witnesses? Let's say we don't have witnesses to the betrothal. Is he believed to say my daughter's betrothed? So, and to that, now he is believed. This actually is from the Torah, because the Torah by a Motzi Shemra, someone who says, your daughter didn't have betulim, she wasn't a virgin when I married her, even though he promised me she was. And he comes and goes to the court, and the father says, Et biti natati la'ish hazeh, I gave my daughter to this man. From those words, the rabbis learn that a man is believed to say, I betrothed my daughter to someone, even if there's no witnesses. But to what extent? To the extent, number one, there's two issues. Number one, she's now a married woman. She can't marry anyone else she wants. Okay, she comes to say, I want to marry someone. He'll say, but you're already betrothed to someone yet. She needs a get if she wants that. Even though there's no witnesses to the betrothal. That's how the power of the father. The question is, though, if she's a betrothed woman, remember, if she sleeps with someone else, she gets stoned. Can we stone her based on the father's testimony? Normally, punishments only come if you have two witnesses. We don't have two witnesses, just the father's word. But the Torah believed the father. So that's the big question. Rav Amar Ein Soklim, Rav Asi Amar Soklim. So Rav says no. Okay, why does Rav say no? Rav Amar Ein Soklim. Ki hemne Rachman al-Av li Surah lekatla lo hemne. The father was just believed to say she's a married woman to forbid her to be with anybody else, but not to the extent that we're going to stone her. You need witnesses for that. Normally you need two witnesses. In this case, when the Torah said, teaches you the father is trusted to say his daughter's betrothed all the way, even to get stoned. Amar Rav Asi, but Rav Asi continues and says, but wait, Modina be'omeret nitkadashi se'en suklim. But if she says about herself nitkadashi, again, we're going to have this distinction. Her saying and her father saying. It's not the same case as before, but he says, if she says I was betrothed, she doesn't get stoned. But Amar Rav Asi, but now he says, Hanishmata didi mirapsan igare. Roofs and second floors are broken based on what I just said, meaning this is difficult. Why? Based on the previous sugya. How so? Hashta uma b'makom she'im ba lichnos kones amarta soklim. If in a case that's more lenient, remember with the father, we believe the father more than the daughter, right? And it's a little bit flipped, but there we're more lenient. We allow, when the father says, I betrothed her to someone and the guy says it was me, we allow the guy to marry. Remember, this is Rav Asi, so Rav Asi's talking. In that case, we allow it, we're more lenient, and yet we're more stringent about the skila, amarta soklim. So makom she'im ba lichnos eino kones, now we're generally more strict. When the woman says, I'm betrothed to him, we don't let her marry him. Eino din shesoklim, so aren't we going to be more strict when the woman says I was betrothed to him and then, cheated on him and then gets punished? but velohi. But it's actually really not a difficulty. And why is this? La'av, now we didn't really explain why she's believed, and this is going to be an important law that we're going to see in lots of places. La'av hemnei rachmana, l'didi lohem. The Torah specifically said it between the Tatilisha said the fathers believed, and that's why she's going to get stoned, because the fathers believed by Torah law. And Rav Asi understood, believed all the way, even though Rav disagreed with this, believed a sword, not to kill, but Rav Asi thinks it's believed all the way based on this Torah law. Why is the woman believed? There's a concept that somebody can forbid something to themselves. Okay? I could say this food's kosher, but I claim it's not. I don't know. I could say the food's not kosher for me, and I could forbid it to me. Okay? I could say I'm a married woman, even though I'm not, and forbid myself to marry anybody else. Just by saying I'm a married woman, I have the power. It's called shavya nafsha chaticha l'isura. Person can turn themselves into isur. They can make something forbidden to them alone. Okay? But that doesn't mean I'm going to get punished for it. Okay? It means that this is now forbidden to me. So I claim I'm betrothed. So I'm forbidden to everybody else by my own declaration. But there's no Torah law that says I can get punished based on it. So that's why he says if the woman herself does it, it's based on this din of Shavia. If the father says it, it's based on this other law of Ne'amanut of the father, and Ne'amanut of the father goes all the way even to say stone. And then we're going to say that Rav Chisda says, Echad ze v'echad ze ein suklim. Rav Chisda holds like Rav. Neither the father nor the girl herself, neither one is going to lead to a stoning situation. And then we're going to start tomorrow with why Rav Chisda is consistent within his approach. So this last section of the Gemara was all about case where the Mishna started with the father says, I betroth the daughter, I don't remember who, and then either one guy shows up or two guys shows up. What's the difference? We had a machlok Rav and Rav Asi about to what extent that one guy is believed, either just to forbid, either to permit her if he gives her a get, or is it even to say that he can now marry her? Okay, and then we had even the one who said he is believed to marry her, not in the case where the woman said it, because that was Rav Asi, because they're worried about this conspiracy. And then we compare this to this other case, and we got to how far is the father's ne'amanut go in a different case, and then sort of compared it to this, but then said no, they're different. And with that, we explained why Rav and Rav Asi disagree in the case. Can she get skila based on the father's testimony alone? That will finish for today. Wishing everybody a chodesh tov, a good day, and wishing for much better news.